Somebody ate here.
Not me. I was assuming.
Maybe they did.
I have my old one. It's marked up. I have that one too from the weekend.
That's all there. Call a meeting on the Committee of Fiscal Affairs to order. First item is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of April 7th, 2010. We have a movement. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any comments or changes or anything? All in favor, say aye.
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 I didn't see it. No, we got more. Okay. We have three resolutions for today's meeting. Action item B is a resolution authorizing the college presidents effective with the spring 2011 semester to require students who have been admitted to associate, baccalaureate, master's, and professional programs a non-refundable commitment deposit of $100 for undergraduate programs and $250 for graduate professional programs, indicating their intention to enroll in such programs. A commitment deposit will enable the university's senior and community colleges to obtain a more accurate enrollment data, which is critical to the decisions related to the academic planning, faculty hiring, course offerings, and student services. While the deposit will be non-refundable for those students who enroll, the amount of the commitment deposit will be credited toward the student's tuition. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Comments and questions? Professor Martel.
If financial aid covers the totality of the tuition, will the $100 be applied to fees?
What we're working on now is, and part of the motivation of wanting to implement this for the spring semester, is we're working with the Office of Enrollment Management under Dean Tatchik's leadership to establish criteria that will be shared with the colleges to say that if students are eligible for full TAP or full Pell, or if their adjusted family income is below a certain level, that the $100 should be waived. Because we know that there are students who, under those circumstances, won't have the $100 to put towards a deposit. So we are working with the Office of Enrollment Management to establish criteria, and that the colleges will be able to use to determine whether the deposit should be waived or not.
That raises a second question. Where does the $100 go?
The $100 will be applied against, if the student pays the deposit and then enrolls in the university, the $100 will be applied against his or her tuition. If they pay the $100 and then don't enroll in the university, the college will get to keep it and will apply it against its tuition revenue target. But again, I just want to point out.
You look happy.
I just want to point out what it said in the reso earlier, is that the motivation behind this was for enrollment management purposes. And I know we're presenting it to the fiscal committee, and we need to for governance purposes to be at this committee. But the fiscal impact of this is minimal. The number of students who will pay the fee and will not come here will be minimal. And so the amount of revenue that each college will generate from this is going to be very, very small. So it really, the motivation is to have better enrollment management and to have a better sense of the students who are actually committed to coming to the university for our college presidents.
So we're not using this as side user fee to raise funds or anything?
Right. That's correct. It's not a fee. It's a deposit towards their eventual tuition payment.
And for students who don't come, we borne some expenses by processing them, so it's not a terrible thing.
Professor Phillips.
It seems to me that line 3 of the resolution is not the same as line 4. My reading of line 3 would indicate that the intent is not to include doctoral programs at the graduate school. But line 4 would suggest that they are included, and I would suggest that the ambiguity be resolved. Line 4 says graduate, but the word graduate would include doctoral programs. Line 3 says baccalaureate, master's, and professional programs, which would not include the academic doctoral programs at the graduate school. So I suggest that it be made clear that line 3 is controlling.
We can clarify that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But the intent is not to include the doctoral programs at the graduate school. It's my understanding.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, so then the word graduate in line 4 should be changed to master's. Okay. To make that clear. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Action item 1C, a resolution authorizing the General Counsel execute an amendment to agreement number N001005 with ACT on behalf of the university to extend the term of the agreement for 30 months to December 31st, 2012. The funding for such extension period shall not exceed a total estimated cost of $1 million. ACT provides testing services to City University to support high-volume assessment of student college readiness in the areas of reading, writing, and math in excess of 100,000 tests per year. The amendment extends the existing agreement term and adds funds for the continued provision of services as City University develops and issues an RFP and awards a new contract. Motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second?
I'll second, but I have a question. Did we not just do this at the last?
I thought we did as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the April meeting, we brought forth a motion to extend the contract for the fiscal year that we're in now until June 30th. This action is to extend that contract beginning on July 1st for the next 30 months.
Why will the RFP process take that long?
Well, it's not that we want to extend this contract currently for ACT, mostly because, and Barry, step in if you you want to add anything, but there are not many vendors. This isn't a large field of vendors who can apply. And so we want to extend the services here. One thing that we're doing as part of this is we're pulling out the writing assessments piece of the testing services, and we're competitively bidding that piece. The previous contract, that was part of the contract with ACT. That's being pulled down and will be competitively bid. But other than that, we are extending the remaining services.
Yeah, I would just add to that the RFP would not normally take that long, but there's also a transition period. So it's a matter of doing the RFP, getting the approval from the state controller and the attorney general, and at the same time making sure there's a transition from the old test to the new one in the event that that ACT is not the group that's chosen.
Yes.
Is this so specialized that only ACT can really perform this testing service for us, or can we do this in-house?
Well, I don't know if we can do it in-house, but in terms of the writing assessments, we do have a cadre of writing assessments that we have used previously that we're going to be using. But I wouldn't feel confident to say this is something, especially with the number of students who require remediation, that's something that we can do in-house at a less costly price than what ACT can provide for us.
If the writing assessment is bid out separately from this contract, does that have an effect on the content of the test? In other words, would different vendors be using different content, or would they be using the same content, the same set of questions and so forth?
That'll be something that'll be part of the evaluation process with the RFP when vendors do apply to the RFP on the writing piece. We expect that that's going to be somewhere in the 6 to 9 month time frame, but that'll be part of the evaluation of the vendors who apply.
That would then that goes into the academic arena if the tests are valid and so forth, and we would have a considerable interest in looking at those bids to make sure that they are equally valid, if not more so than the one that ACT provides.
Okay.
So if we could be part of that process, the UFS, that would be good.
Any further questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. And the final resolution is a resolution authorizing the General Counsel to execute an amendment to agreement NMP 06001 with KPMG Inc. on behalf of the university to extend the term of the contract for 3 years to 12/31/2012 for audit, tax, and advisory services. The services shall not exceed a total estimated cost of $2,225,000 for those 3 years. These services support City University's statutory requirements to produce consolidated university financial statements in each financial year. This extension ensures continuity of services as CUNY completes its transition to the CUNY First financial system. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
Second.
Questions?
Question, yeah.
Yes, Phil.
Typically, what organizations do is that after a number, I don't have any problems with KPMG, but after a number of years, it makes good fiscal sense to change accounting firms, just so that we don't have too cozy or too comfortable a relationship with one firm. How many years have we had KPMG working with us?
6, Barry?
I think we've had them about seven or 8 years.
7 or 8 years?
Yeah.
What's the process that we have? I mean, in terms of the thought that I have, I don't know if we have a policy in place or, but the principle, I think, is extremely important, and it's how corporations, organizations usually.
Normally, we would go out with an RFP. We've gone out with our contracts for 5 years on audit services. We would change, we would issue a new RFP at the end of 5 years. Our feeling was that given the fact that KPMG had been looking at some of the CUNY First information technology issues, that there was some benefit in keeping with them for at least another 3 years, which is when CUNY First is supposed to be implemented. What has happened, though, is that the policy that KPMG has is that at the end of 5 years, I think 4 or 5 years, the engagement partner is changed and is rotated off. And we've looked at some of the Sarbanes-Oxley recommendations on that, and they seem to focus more on the engagement partner than they do on the audit firm. But our intent would be to go out with a new RFP after this 3-year engagement is complete.
Again, I don't have any problems with KPMG, but I think that the principle is something that we ought to abide by. I mean, as opposed to just staying with one firm ad infinitum. So.
We've already had one audit partner rotate off. The person who was here when I first got here was rotated off 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And Trustee Barry, I think we agree with you from a policy perspective that we should have those rotations. But as Barry said, the one overriding issue here was the CUNY First implementation and making sure that went as smoothly as possible.
Okay.
2 points. First, this fee seems reasonable for 3 years' worth of auditing services.
I had to read it twice because I originally blanched.
Exactly.
The loss leader.
The first time I read it per year.
So did I.
Not to give anyone ideas.
Congratulations.
But the second point is, this normally would be the role of the audit committee. I understand the audit committee is a subcommittee of this committee, but really this is one of the clear defining things that an audit committee would do for the future.
If I could address, I agree with Professor Martel, and Professor, I was, as chairman of that subcommittee, was approached about this and suggested primarily because of my new tenure in that position that it come before the whole committee.
And, based on the comments that were made last time, at the last meeting about the audit committee, I do think we need to understand the distinction of the roles, whether it really is a separate committee, it should be, or whether it should be part of the Fiscal Affairs Committee. What's going on in the world of corporate governance right now, and the role of what an audit committee is. It could be part of the Fiscal Affairs Committee with enhancing that function. We have a separate meeting. We need to go into executive session on a lot of those subjects, or keep it as a subcommittee. But I think we should have that discussion because of what's going on in governance, not just corporate governance, university governance, all those issues.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree that we should have a discussion, and I would respectfully suggest that we have it sooner rather than later, so at the beginning of the audit life cycle that we have the discussion.
Agreed. Being no further questions, call a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The next item of business, we're going to take item C first. We're going to take the presentation by KPMG on the audit plan before we go into discussions on the city budget and on the performance of the investments. Barry?
Thank you. In your packet, there was a copy of the audit plan that KPMG had presented. My staff had a chance to meet with KPMG and go over the plan and make some comments and suggestions and changes. This meeting was a further opportunity for the committee to weigh in on that plan and maybe to provide some other ideas that KPMG can then take forward and implement. We have with us tonight from KPMG 3 members of the firm. To my left is Shelley Massey, the engagement partner, and I think everyone has met Shelley. And to Shelley's left is Aaron Shimberry, who is a senior manager, and both Shelley and Aaron have been at previous meetings. And to Aaron's left is Lou Messina, and Lou is the National Industry Director for Higher Education and Not-for-Profit, and also a partner in KPMG. So let me ask them to begin their presentation.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Good evening. I passed out a PowerPoint presentation that Aaron and I are going to be going through. It does include the audit plan for the upcoming 2010 audit. This is the first time that we're going through this in this level of detail for the committee, so please, as we go through this, if you have any questions, just jump in. Also, there is a page that is loose that is at the back of the presentation. That includes some current college and university industry issues that Lou Messina is going to be speaking to at the conclusion of the audit plan. Okay, so jumping to page 2, where we do have the senior engagement team. As Barry mentioned, the 3 of us are included on here. Lou is the National Industry Director for higher education at the firm nationally. He's also the client service partner here for CUNY and has been for a number of years. And the engagement team has remained relatively consistent with the prior years. All of the core audit team members from the last year's audit are continuing on for the current year. On page 3, we have included our 4-phase audit workflow. You have seen this before. The planning and control evaluation phases are what we perform at interim, which has begun. As Barry mentioned, we did have a kickoff meeting with management on May 10th, which began the planning phase of the audit. And we began, I think today, at visiting the campuses where we perform some of the control test work.
With regard to control evaluation, did you modify your phase 2 in light of any experiences you had in the prior audits?
Yes, we do look to see where we have had issues in the past with some of the campuses, and we do go back and visit those campuses that have had problems. So yes.
Is there a section on required communications?
Oh, the required communications is partly what we're performing right now, and then we perform the rest of the required communications under auditing standards at the conclusion of the audit. All right, so our interim procedures, which began, run through August, and then we return in September through October to complete the substantive testing and completion phases. And it wraps up when we meet back with the audit committee in October. On pages 4 and 5, I have included the audit responsibilities. There are 3 different members that have audit committee responsibilities. The first is KPMG, and we have a responsibility to conduct the audit in accordance with auditing standards that are generally accepted in the United States, as well as standards applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards. And again, government auditing standards is applicable because we issue an A133 report over the university's federal awards. And with respect to the university's foundations, while they are included in the financial statements, we rely on the opinions of the independent auditors of the foundations. We do not audit the foundation's financial statements. We do receive them and review them for reasonableness, but the numbers are not audited by KPMG. Our audit also does include consideration over internal controls. So based on the internal controls test work that we perform now, we utilize the results of those test work to determine the remaining substantive procedures. So if the internal controls are functioning appropriately and we can rely on them, it allows us to do less substantive work. If we cannot rely on certain internal controls, then there are areas where we may have to perform more substantive procedures.
That's all outlined on page 5 of the draft that was shared with the committee. If in fact you obtain audit evidence that the internal controls are not effective for a particular area, how will that information be shared?
Through the management letter.
Thank you.
All right. Management also has responsibilities for the audit, and these include to design and maintain an adequate control system, which includes financial statement disclosure controls, and these controls are tested by us. They also have a responsibility to develop prudent judgments and estimates, and these are also audited by KPMG, and we do, as part of our required communications, indicate to you what the significant judgments and estimates are and how we performed procedures and if we had any audit findings related to them. And lastly, management is responsible for preparing timely and accurate financial statements and footnotes. And then on page 5, the Audit Committee's responsibilities. The Audit Committee provides oversight and promotes continuous improvement and also supports effective communication between all of the members responsible that have Audit Committee responsibilities. All right.
Next question. On the oversight of the audit subcommittee, do you provide during the course of the audit periodic updates? Do you seek consultation? How is this oversight, in your view, effectuated by the subcommittee?
In terms of what the Audit Committee's actual responsibilities are?
No, in terms of actually discharging those responsibilities of oversight. If you're in the middle of the audit, we don't hear from you for 3 months. My first question would be, how are we going to be doing oversight? So what is the part of the plan that facilitates our discharging the responsibility that you have here in
Well, we
on page
also
5?
do look at minutes from throughout the year. I know the Audit Committee hasn't been as active as it has at other organizations, so I do understand that the Audit Committee will be meeting more frequently. But generally, what we do is for audit committees that we are not attending, we do obtain the Audit Committee minutes to see what has been discussed between them and management.
But it's the other way around.
Yeah.
If you find something in the process, the communication system, and Mark, you were chairman prior, there were communication, well, I'll let you speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the issue that you're trying to bring up here is in order for the audit subcommittee, whether it remains an audit subcommittee or becomes a full committee, in order for it to become more active, you want to set up a procedure so that there's more formal and substantive conversations with KPMG as the audit's progressing so that you can provide feedback during the course of it as opposed to just listening to the results when it's too late to do anything about it.
Yes.
Right?
Right, and that can happen through executive session time where it's the Audit Committee and the auditors alone.
On an ongoing basis.
Yes, I would suggest that happens at the end of each meeting. That's what I typically see my other audit committees do.
Right. I mean, my issue is it can't be, review the plan and then accept the plan. There's got to be intermediate steps, particularly if there's issues that arise, because the audit committee report, the auditors report to the audit committee, and we have to have some control over that process. We're not auditors, but we have to understand the process and where any conflicts arise.
And your point on page 5 obviously contemplates that. So really, I think we're on the same page. I just wanted to understand how you envision that occurring.
Okay. Moving on to the next page, I included this slide here. It provides some information over materiality because 2 meetings ago when we were meeting for the conclusion of the financial statements, some questions came up about materiality, how we look at materiality in terms of the audit process. So in terms of materiality, we do look at materiality for many different areas of our audit, starting at planning. It also determines the nature, timing, and extent of our audit procedures. And it also is something that's assessed when we evaluate misstatements. So materiality is not just one number that is utilized throughout the audit. It generally, as we progress through the audit, that materiality level becomes smaller and smaller. And the information is considered to be material if its omission or misstatement could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decisions of users taken on the basis of the financial statements. So what that means is, last year we noted an error in the financial statements, but we considered it to be immaterial. And that basis for that conclusion was on the fact that if the error had been known a year ago, would it have changed the user's decisions based on those financial statements with the error corrected? And we had concluded no, that it hadn't. So we look at both the misstatement and omission of information. And materiality just isn't quantitative, it is also qualitative. So the qualitative aspects that we look at are whether or not the error would have changed debt covenants, if there was any fraud involved. In those cases, materiality would be lowered. So even though it may be falling under a quantitative threshold, qualitatively, we would have considered it to be immaterial. So those are just some
Kelly,
things that...
Refresh on memory, what was the error?
That was
No,
it was the missing component unit for the Economic Development Corporation, the bonds.
Right, that's what I meant.
Yes, yeah, the bond, it was an asset, it was a balance sheet only error, and the fixed assets and debt were understated.
Oh, I remember.
Okay. All right. On page 7, we have included the timeline. So today, we are reviewing and approving the audit plan. As I mentioned today, we also began the interim field work where we go to campus visits and perform A133, the beginning of the A133 test work. And we do have a further slide to discuss which campuses we are visiting this year. And then on August 30th, we return to Central and perform our substantive procedures. And then in the October-November timeframe, we will be attending an audit subcommittee meeting. We'll be performing the required communications under auditing standards, issue our financial statements, and also during this time, we issue the senior college only report. And then in December, and into the February timeframe, but we do hope to issue both of these in December. It's the management letter and the A133 report. So all of the reports and deliverables I just previously mentioned are summarized here. These are consistent with the prior year. So besides the audit of the financial statements, we do provide an audit on the senior colleges only, and that's for purposes of the state of New York. And then we audit the A133 and provide a management letter. I guess the one thing that is slightly different in the scope of services this year is with respect to the A133 report. The university did receive some stimulus money, and that will be included in our A133 report this year.
When you do the A133 report and the management letter, in both those reports, you're covering internal controls and risk-related issues.
Yes.
My understanding is the 133 standard is a little bit higher. Is there a way to kind of summarize the internal control issues as you understand them for the audit committee at some time, sort of kind of integrating those two reports so into a more integrated whole?
Currently, you're right. I mean, the A133 report only includes internal control deficiencies that are either considered a significant deficiency or a material weakness.
Right.
If we do note things that are not at that level for the A133, we do include them in the management letter. So their management letter comments do include some things that we have identified for A133 purposes that are not at that significant deficiency level.
But help me out here. I thought in reading the material that the 133 standard, that the materiality definition appeared to me to be a little bit different for 133 than it did for the remainder of the audit. And what I'm interested in is there a way to integrate all of those internal control discussions within a report to us? It may not rise to the level of something to be included in a management letter, but it may rise to the level that a committee would want to be aware of.
Right. When I look at an A133 audit, it really does have two components. One is an audit of compliance, which really there is no level of materiality. I mean, if something is not in compliance, that is considered to be a finding. On the internal control side, the internal control deficiencies and financial statement internal control deficiencies are at the same, they're under the same definitions. So everything is consistent.
Thank you.
Okay. On the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and she's going to walk through a little bit more about the audit approach.
So on page 9 of the presentation, as Shelley mentioned earlier, we visit both the Office of the University Controller as well as 8 colleges. Those 8 colleges are chosen on a rotational basis, as well as discussions with Barry's group and if there's been a change in management. The colleges are listed here. 3 of them were required to be visited based on the rotational basis, and the rest were discussed with Barry's group due to the various changes in management and results of prior audits at some of the schools that had a lot of findings last year or in the prior year.
Just one thing that I wanted to point out about this, while these are the 8 campuses that we are visiting for internal control financial statement purposes, for A133, we do visit all locations, and we do have to make a sample from each school.
On the next slide, this just lays out the areas of operations that we review during the campus visit audits. We look at tuition management, cash management, procurement and property management, information technology, and human resources. We perform control test work at the schools, which allows us, as Shelley mentioned earlier, to reduce our substantive procedures if the controls are operating effectively. We do test human resources at all 19 colleges. We select new hires and terminations at each school and make sure the controls are appropriate. The next slide on page 11 just lists...
I'm sorry, does that also include outside, where would outside services be covered?
You mean procurement? Purchasing?
In procurement?
Yeah, that's in
Yes.
procurement.
Okay, good, thank you.
And we also test those controls at the university controller as well. We just do a sample at each of the schools.
Okay, thanks.
On slide 11, we just laid out the significant audit areas and significant estimates that we audit while we're at the university controller's office. Some of these areas are touched upon when we go to the schools, but the significant audit areas relate to tuition, debt, capital assets, cash and investments, payroll, financial reporting, and appropriations from the state and the city. We can consider these as significant areas, just one for dollar value, but also if there's any risk associated with those. And the significant estimates, this is where management uses their judgment to come up with these estimates. So we review these to ensure that they're reasonable based on management's assumptions.
And also something I just wanted to point out. The last 3 estimates, valuation of investments, valuation of the OPEB liability, and valuation of swaps, we do also involve KPMG specialists to assist the audit team in assessing the reasonableness of those estimates.
And slide 12 just lays out other audit procedures that we perform on any audit. We analytically review the statements. We review journal entries throughout the year and at the end of the audit to ensure that they're appropriately reviewed and have supporting documentation. We're really looking for any unusual transactions or anything that might be fraudulent. We review the financial statement disclosures. We'll have a tax manager come out and review the financial statements to do a tax review to make sure that the university is tax compliant and meets the requirements of a 501c3. We'll perform test work on IT general controls. We have our IT team come in and look at the CUNY First system. Last year they were involved in the implementation of the system. We'll perform test work on the university's entity level controls, which are the university level controls over policies and procedures, governance, human resources. We'll review the board minutes, and we'll also send a legal letter to in-house counsel.
All right, on pages 13 and 14, we have included our approach to fraud risks. At the conclusion of the audit, one of the areas of required communications is to discuss the fraud risks and if anything had been identified throughout our audit process. So on page 13, when we consider risks of fraud, we consider the areas that are included in these four buckets, these four boxes. So what types of incentives and pressures, attitudes, what type of attitudes does top management have, where are there opportunities, and if there is any knowledge of suspected or alleged fraud. And then on page 14, we have included our approach to fraud. And the approach to fraud covers all phases of our audit. So it isn't something that's just included in the planning section and then we don't, consider it for the rest of the audit until we have to report back. It's considered at planning. It is considered in our control evaluation because we do perform internal controls over the fraud risks. We also have substantive procedures that we perform over areas of fraud. Revenue recognition and financial reporting are areas that are considered to have fraud risk. And then it's part of our conclusion. And part of that completion phase is when we report back to the committee. So it is something that is all-encompassing in our approach. On pages 15 and 16, I have included the new GASB statements that are applicable for CUNY this fiscal year. Both of these were reported back in November when we met for the completion of last year. But I've been working with management to get them ready for these reporting changes. And the first is accounting and financial reporting for intangible assets, GASB Statement 51, which now requires intangible assets to be capitalized along with property, plant, and equipment. And these kinds of capitalized intangible assets would be copyrights, patents, or internally generated computer software.
Is that a big asset item for us?
That's probably more management. I know that they are looking a lot at copyrights and patents.
We're looking at, we're looking at that right now. Tom Zhao has been conducting a survey of the, both of the commercialization office and the colleges. Right now, it doesn't look like it's a very big item for us in either of these areas.
I was going to look against the last year's statements, but I didn't get a chance. I just wanted to slow.
It wasn't in last year's statement.
It's a new requirement.
It's a new requirement.
Hopefully this will become a bigger issue over there.
Let's hope so. Maybe someone will buy us and we can really have intangibles.
And then on the next page, the second new GASB statement is number 53, accounting and financial reporting for derivative instruments. This is applicable for the university's swaps that they have. Currently, they have many different swaps. They are valued at fair value in the footnote disclosures. However, this GASB statement now requires that the fair value of the derivative instruments be recorded on the balance sheet. So similar to what FASB did about 5, 6, 7 years ago.
So this is just like 133.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So that completes the PowerPoint presentation that I had. Yes. We have no other questions. I'll turn it over to Lou.
Thank you, Shelley. A little further introduction. My name appeared in a box on that first page as in two roles, as the National Industry Director and also as the Client Service Partner. In that latter role, as Client Service Partner, I do try to meet periodically with Barry to talk to him about how our team is doing and what we can do better during the audit. And I think he's blunt with me when we can do better, and we try to do that. CUNY is a very, very important client to the firm and to our New York office, and that is why I have direct involvement with it as National Industry Director. This list of items of Audit Committee focus areas, and Shelley had told me before coming in here that the discussion surrounding should there be a separate audit committee or an audit subcommittee was in fact discussed at the last few meetings, and I'll just weigh in without trying to get the debate of that started again. But certainly among our clients, and I would consider both private and public institutions in that field, audit committees are more and more separate standalone committees and are not subcommittees to either finance or fiscal affairs. I would think that we've gotten to the point now where the number of subcommittee relationships is relatively few in that universe. So I'll just pass that along. And I think part of that is because the audit committee's agenda and some of these items that I'm going to discuss here are part of that agenda. The Audit Committee's agenda, I think, has expanded enough for it to have sufficient responsibility to be a freestanding committee. This listing of Audit Committee focus areas are those things that we see Audit Committees spending time with outside of what I would call the core responsibilities that we're discussing today, reviewing the financial statements, understanding the audit, whether that is the external audit or what internal audit might be doing as well in reporting to the committee. So these are other things. And the first item sort of got to the front because of the financial crisis, which I think is now, for many institutions, more financial uncertainty. I think public institutions have an element of crisis that is going to continue for some period of time as state and local government budgets are strained. But I think that to some extent, this second item of enterprise risk management is, for many institutions, capturing those financial risks, bottom line risks, funding risks, liquidity risks, etc. And I would say that I think we've reached the point now with enterprise risk management where, from an audit committee perspective, the differences between public companies and higher education institutions and not-for-profit organizations are being narrowed. When Sarbanes-Oxley 404 was the real focus of audit committees of public companies, I think there was a huge difference between those integrated audits and what we were talking about with colleges and universities. I think now risk oversight is the bigger conversation that's taking place at audit committees, and I think those differences between public companies and not-for-profit organizations, including colleges and universities and public university systems, have narrowed. What we have seen is that enterprise risk management is most often coming under the purview of the audit committee, but I think the audit committees in places that have been doing this longer are pushing back and saying, that puts too much on our agenda. Some of these risks are really not the purview of the audit committee, and the audit committee needs to be the funnel of those issues to other board committees, perhaps, to provide the oversight. An example of that I'll give at an institution that I was at recently, a lot of conversation was taking place with respect to the study abroad programs and the risks, student safety risks and other risks associated with those study abroad programs. And the audit committee quickly said, big topic, very important, not our issue. Let's push that to the Student Affairs Committee and let them provide the oversight. What we should do as an audit committee is make sure the process is working, that management is identifying risks, prioritizing those risks, coming up with steps to mitigate those risks, and communicating with, frankly, what is a full board issue and not just an audit committee or any committee issue, and making sure that folks are aware that this is taking place. And again, I'm going to give each of these somewhat short shrift because there's not enough time, but I would be delighted to come back and talk about any of these items for a longer period of time. All things endowment, it was the big topic last year as we had more rules with respect to fair value, etc. UPMIFA, which is the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, which you've probably heard about, is still not passed in New York. We are among just a few blue-colored entities in that UPMIFA map of who has passed this that have not passed it. Although, and here I'm going to give my opinion and not speak for KPMG, the law that is on the table right now in New York, we don't need passed because a component of that law right now is that institutions should notify prior donors of endowments and in effect give them the choice of whether or not they want to adopt the new law or stick with the old law. This is intended to be a uniform law, and that does not get us to uniform. So speaking personally, I would rather not pass that one than have that term. Regulatory compliance, and again, for CUNY, a lot of the research compliance issues are moved over to the Research Foundation. But there are still regulatory compliance issues that you want to be confident that management is on top of laws and regulations and compliance with those laws and regulations. Shelley has already touched on the accountability for stimulus funds. Good news there was we were concerned as auditors that we were going to be asked to somehow attest to the jobs created and retained information that institutions were reporting. Fortunately, that isn't the case because we frankly don't want any part of it.
Yeah, I wonder why.
It's very subjective information, very difficult to attest to, so I think the government did step aside in that regard. Conflict of interest and related party transactions. Again, this is another area where very often in terms of how the audit committee's responsibilities are carved out, we find them more and more having responsibility with respect to conflict of interest oversight. What is management doing with respect to an annual or periodic circularization of staff and senior executives within the system to find out what relationships they might have, et cetera. And again, very often this is audit committee purview. Clearly, from a reputation risk standpoint and a publicity standpoint, a very hot area. And again, for universities in total, research conflict of interest have been a primary concern. And again, that issue perhaps moves a bit more to the Research Foundation side of the house. Our Attorney General, as you know, was very interested a few years ago in the student loan area, was very concerned with whether or not students were getting a good deal or not with respect to student loans. I think if I could characterize his concern on a theme basis, I think the theme was that wherever the institution was coming between a vendor and the student, the Attorney General was concerned that the student was getting the best deal possible. Most recently, he has hit the ball into our court with respect to health insurance and what's being provided to students in that regard. And again, are students getting the best deal possible? Are institutions watching out for the students' best interest? And he will, I'm sure, stay on top of that issue as well. Congressional and IRS attention is not abating. Certainly from Congress's standpoint, they see higher education and health care as two components of the not-for-profit arena that are of particular concern to them. These tend to be the largest, wealthiest, hold the greatest number of assets, employ the greatest numbers of people. And again, themes emerge here. I think from an IRS and Congress perspective, they would say that tax exemption is a privilege and that these institutions need to continue to warrant that privilege. You might have seen Senator Grassley very recently, again, came public with concerns about tax-exempt debt. His concern is that he views tax-exempt debt as perhaps indirect arbitrage, that institutions have a choice of going into the tax-exempt market or using their own funds. And he believes very often that choice is being made in what appears to be an arbitrage kind of decision. We can do better with our own return on our own investments and take advantage of the tax-advantaged borrowing that the government provides us. And he wants that looked into more, and he's concerned about, again, the benefit that comes from that tax-exempt status. Form 990, fortunately, you do not have to file one as a separate entity. You do file a Form 990T for unrelated business income, but you didn't have to get involved with all of the new Form 990 disclosures. And the next item, impact of cost reductions, I think is a very important one for audit committees. I think that audit committees in that traditional role of being concerned about internal controls of the financial statements need to be concerned about where cost reductions were taking place at institutions, whether those were through furloughs or actual reduced headcount. How did that affect segregation of duties? How did that affect review procedures that were in place? How did it affect overall internal controls? And again, I think that there's a lot of concern about cost reductions and a lot of focus on cost reductions. Perhaps a bit more, by the way, in public institutions than private. Not that private are not. I think some of our wealthiest, most elite institutions from a private standpoint, those that are very endowment dependent, certainly have had to react to the crisis and cut costs. But I think that the sheer size of public institutions and what's happening with their governmental funding is causing them to look. You might have seen very recently, there are articles about the University of California. They hired an outside firm to come in at a cost of $3 million to advise them on how to cut some $500 million from their budget over a period of time. And a lot of that reduction, from what I've read, comes from what I would call centralization of activities that were previously spread out in other units and in a decentralized way. But I certainly don't know enough about that cost study, but again, the notion of pulling costs out of the system and gaining efficiencies. Information technology is certainly a big issue here as you move forward with the new system. To some extent, for audit committees, the concern about information technology is one of privacy and security, but I think here you also have the issue of a new accounting system coming in and concerns about, again, the transition to that system, change in processes and controls that you need to be concerned about as those processes change to accommodate the new systems. International activities, again, for some institutions, even in the research side of the house, international activities are growing, and I think the basic doing business in risks need to be a concern of audit committees. And then the last item I have here is oversight of internal audit. I think assessing the effectiveness of internal audit is a particular challenge for audit committees. I think that to some extent it's hard to get a feeling of all of the benefit that comes from the work of internal audit. And I think more and more we see audit committees asking us and others how, what metrics might they use, what's the way to go about assessing the effectiveness of internal audit. There was a lot there in a short time, but again, didn't want to overstay my welcome and would be happy to talk about this further for individual items or all of them.
Thank you. Any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Good luck. We'll be back to you in a couple of months. Okay. Back to the agenda, to new investments or budgets?
We'll do budgets first.
Let's do the bad.
Right, we'll end with good news. On the budget side, I'll start with the state budget. Last time that we met back in April, the budget was 6 days late, and now we're about 66 days late on the state budget. So really not much to say on the state budget in terms of any updates. We are in constant communication with the State Division of Budget, with Senate Finance, with Assembly Ways and Means, and there are discussions that are taking place. But again, nothing to report in terms of any pending agreement. Once we get to July 1st, if there is no budget in place, then we will be in the same place as the other state agencies have been since April 1st, which is there'll have to be emergency appropriations passed for us to continue to operate. That's something that we've been through before. The last time that occurred was in 2004. So we'll have to work closely with our colleges if that does occur. So that's what we're keeping our eye on now is will we have a deal in place by July 1st on the state side. On the city side, since the last time we met, the mayor has issued his executive budget. There were several positive developments for the university in the mayor's executive budget. All of our mandatory needs are funded in terms of building rentals, fringe benefits, collective bargaining. They're all funded in the mayor's executive budget. The mayor also provided $7 million for community college enrollment needs due to the historic enrollment growth we've had at the community colleges. The proposed reduction of $13.9 million that the mayor had put up came in at $6.5 million, so it was greatly reduced. And the last item that I want to mention is that the mayor funded $9 million for costs for our new community college. About half of that will cover rental costs for the temporary space for the new community college, and the other half will be used to begin to staff up and for planning costs in the new community college. And so overall, some very positive developments. We still have some work to do with the city council in terms of our lobbying efforts for them to add in some more funds for the community colleges. Of most note is $21.4 million in prior year reductions that the council added back on a one-time basis in fiscal year 10 needs to be put back in fiscal year 11. And so we're working with the council on that. The city budget will most likely not be adopted for several more weeks, maybe 2 to 3 more weeks. But we are optimistic that once the deal is in place with the council, that our community colleges will be in a much better position than what we were projecting several months ago. Any questions on either state or city budget?
Professor Phillip?
Given the various ways of describing the mayor's executive budget for the community colleges, what does it do in terms of funding per student in the community colleges. Is that funding staying level, or for the existing community colleges, not the new community college? Is that funding staying level? Is it increasing, decreasing on a per student basis?
Well, I'll start with the state side. On the state side, the governor had proposed a $285 per FTE reduction in base aid for community colleges. The Senate proposal and the Senate resolution, rather, and the Assembly budget bill that were proposed restored that reduction. And so that funding is staying static based on the Senate and Assembly proposals. On the city side, we do have additions in the city budget. Our maintenance of effort level is just about there. We're actually about $1 million above maintenance of effort. However, those include mandatory cost increases offset by proposed reductions. And given the increased enrollment at our community colleges, we are concerned about the issue that you raised in terms of keeping things equal. And that's why we're lobbying the council to restore these reductions that are included within the mayor's executive budget.
Thank you.
But all things considered, good news on the city side.
Yes, absolutely. Good news. The executive budget that was issued this year, in recent memory, was the best that CUNY has ever done in the mayor's executive budget. So it's definitely good news.
And in all of them, it's who's on first.
Janet?
I'm just going to provide a brief update on the investment pool for the 4 months ended April 30. Those are the most recent results we have. This will be in U.S. dollar terms. And just to provide a backdrop, as you know, the U.S. equity market hit a 19-month high, and towards the end of April started selling off, primarily due to the European equity crisis as well as the civil fraud charges against Goldman Sachs that put a real crimp into the markets, as you know. Outside of the U.S., European equities got hit, but primarily because of the decline in the euro. It was down somewhat, but in U.S. dollar terms, it was down about 2% more. While the emerging markets continue to outperform the developed markets. On the credit side, the bond markets, the U.S. and emerging markets continue to be in the black, and the European bond markets have actually shown negative returns with what is going on. Commodities are on the upside. As you know, we just recently hired the 2 hedge fund-to-fund firms, and so they're just getting started, and we'll most likely see some results from them, hopefully defensive going into this period of time. So within this context, the investment pool has actually held its own during this 4-month period. And most of the asset classes, if you look at page 2 of the letter or page 5 of the attached report, most of the asset classes are showing very benchmark-like returns, with the exception of emerging markets. So that our total U.S. equity portfolio is up 8.5% versus the Russell 3 of 8.2. So very slightly, outperforming its benchmark. International equity is down 1.3%, again, underperforming its benchmark by about 40 basis points. However, Aberdeen, our emerging market manager, is up 6% versus its benchmark of 3.7, so a 230 basis point value added there. On the real asset side, with Wellington, with the 10% exposure that we have, that portfolio is up 1.4%, surpassing its very customized benchmark, that is a Wellington custom benchmark, by about 30 basis points. And on the fixed income side, just slightly below the benchmark there. So as you know, the board approved the new investment policy December 2008, and since then we've been transitioning the portfolio to new asset classes, changes in managers, and we are now pretty close to our target allocations, with the exception of the non-marketable alternatives, which the decision is to wait until later for a discussion on that. And given current market conditions and the correction going on in the market, our feeling is to basically stay where we are with the exception of fixed income, which we will address at the next subcommittee meeting on June 22nd. So with that, unless there are any questions, yes.
Any questions?
Are we facing capital calls? Are we in
No,
private equity type investments where we?
0% allocation there.
You just missed a major headache.
We don't need those headaches.
Going forward basis.
Oh, that's the one area, the non-marketable alternatives that we will be addressing at a certain point when the committee has time to further discuss that area. But we just completed the work with the hedge fund of funds, and we're going to complete the work in the fixed income area at our next meeting. And then I think we're going to wait until further in the year, given market conditions, to make any further changes.
Any other further questions or comments? Thank you, Jen. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I mean,